Want to know what the science actually says about how to increase your exit velocity and bat speed?
Hit in the air. And that swing.
Overload, underload training is everywhere in today's baseball training landscape. But what does the science say about the efficacy of these types of training programs? Today, we're going to take you through what the scientific literature says about how to most effectively train to increase your bat speed. The first real indication of a measured implementation of overload and underload training for the purposes of increased athletic performance happened in the Soviet Union and in the Eastern Bloc in the 70s and 80s when they first started to experiment with this with some of their Olympic athletes, primarily throwers for track and field. There were 6 primary studies that were done with track and field throwing athletes from 1973 to 1984. In these studies, they had their throwers, so javelin throwers, shot putters, hammer throwers, discus throwers, train with heavier and lighter implements than what they would use as a standard weight in competition. In short, these studies revealed that by increasing or decreasing the load of the implements thrown in training, they could produce a better overall performance in competition. They would be able to throw the hammer, the shot put, the discus, whatever the case may be, at a higher velocity and therefore a greater distance when they were in competition. This was kind of the birth of the concept of overload and underload training. But through that research, they were able to really articulate some key training principles. The primary finding that you'll hear quoted all the time today is the amount of overload and underload that should be used. Basically, the findings suggest that implement resistance variations in training should range from 5 to 20% lighter and heavier than standard implements. This is the origin of the prescribed 20% overload and underload. It is why you have awesome products like the Bat Speed trainers that are precisely 20% heavier and lighter than the standard game bat weights. And then the findings also suggested that the employment of varied resistance training enhances speed, strength, aka power development, and that when training with weighted and standard weight implements, you should use about a 2-to-1 frequency ratio of heavy or light implements to the standard weight implements. Now, building on those 6 studies that were done by the Soviets and the Eastern Bloc countries, there's also been an additional 11 studies that have been done primarily to focus on the effects of overload, underload training for the purposes of increasing throwing velocity. 8 of these studies were done with overload only. 2 of them were done with underload only, and 1 was done with a combination of overload and underload. All of these 11 studies revealed an increase in throwing velocity. Several trainers and facilities in current day have built upon these principles and put together arm velocity enhancement programs that have yielded big results, further suggesting that this modality of training can be beneficial for rotational athletes. There are also 4 studies that have been done exclusively focusing on how to increase bat swing velocity. 3 of them have focused on baseball and 1 is focused on softball. There are really 2 categories, one focusing on overload training and the other focusing on overload and underload integral training. So 3 of these studies looked into overload training. Now of those 3, 2 of them saw an increase in bat speed and 1 of them actually didn't see any significant increase in bat speed. The one that didn't see an increase in bat speed was actually the one that was done on women's college softball players. There's a little bit of a caveat because with this particular study, they only did it for a duration of 4 weeks. And in the study conducted by Harris and Dudley on neuromuscular anatomy and adaptations to conditioning, they demonstrated that typically 6 to 8 weeks of training is needed to demonstrate muscular adaptations. So it really could just be a matter of the softball study not having a long enough duration to show any meaningful or significant increase in their bat speed. The other 2 studies in this particular category were 7 weeks in duration and 6 weeks in duration, and both of those showed a significant increase in bat speed. This seems to suggest that the program duration should be a minimum of 6 weeks long. Durin and Okazaki's 7-week study had 10 ex-college and professional athletes participate. They swung 2 different overload implements. A weighted wooden bat of 34 ounces, which was 12% greater than the average standard game bat used by the subjects, and a commercial air resistance power swing device. Sergo and Boatwright did a 6-week study and they had college players participate. They had 2 separate training groups. One group used a standard game bat between 29 and 31 ounces, However, with that small range, it in effect became a 1 ounce overload or underload for several of the participants depending on what weight their actual game bat was. This group increased their bat speed by about 8.8%. The other group used a 62 ounce bat, which was more than 100% overload. This group increased their bat speed by 8% even. Then we have the two studies, or sort of this separate category, that looked into overload and underload integral training. So again, Sergo and Boatwright had this 6-week study with college ball players as their participants. They found that all three groups in their study, including the control group, improved bat swing velocity between 8 and 8.8%. But again, similar to what we went over before, it is important to recognize that their control group may have swung underweighted bats of 29 to 30 ounces as compared with the testing bat of 31 ounces. They concluded that players could swing any bat 100 times a day, 3 times a week, for 6 weeks, which is 1,800 total swings, and improve bat speed. However, the other study that was done on overload, underload integral training found different results. The other one was conducted by Coop Durin, and he found that the control group did not significantly increase their bat swing velocity. That control group took 150 swings a day, 4 times a week for 12 weeks, so 7,200 total swings, with a standard game bat at 30 ounces. And again, did not improve their bat speed significantly. Durin's 12-week study on integral overweight, underweight training had college ball players participate. There were 3 different groups in that study: a dry swing group, a batting practice group, and a control group. They took 100 swings per session with the overload and underload bats of plus or minus 12%, and 50 swings were taken per session with the standard weight game bat. This seems to have been done intentionally to mirror the 2-to-1 frequency ratio that the Soviet findings suggested as optimal. The dry swing group increased their bat speed by 6%, whereas the batting practice group actually increased their bat speed by a full 10%. They hypothesized that the added intent of trying to hit the ball hard led to these improved results. We find this to be an extremely important little nugget of information that seems to get glanced over a lot. The role of intent, the role of trying to hit the ball hard, plays an absolutely crucial role in the ability to develop bat speed, gain bat speed, create an elite rotational athlete. But the training can become really arduous, so you have to have an external measurement, very precise, accurate measurement that gives this external feedback to the athletes to let them know if they really are operating on the edges of their ability, if they really are giving it all they've got. If they have that external objective feedback that clearly tells them exactly how fast they're swinging on every single swing, it's undoubtedly gonna add intent to every swing that they take. Over time, that marginal difference in effort leads to big time gains in your overall bat speed. And it'll absolutely lead to a greater return on investment for every swing that you take during a training session. Intent really is what drives bat speed development. And if you deconstruct it, instant, accurate feedback paired with smart program design is how you're gonna help athletes generate more intent. So what does it all mean? Let's revisit some of the questions that we opened the video with. When designing a bat speed development program, what should the frequency of training look like? What should the program duration look like? Well, based upon the scientific literature, it's pretty clear that we want the duration to be between 6 and 8 weeks at a minimum. And in terms of the overall frequency, when assimilating all of the different information from these studies that we've looked at, they offer the following ranges: about 240 to 600 swings per week for 6 to 12 weeks. However, when we've designed our in-house programs, we tend to vary the volume on a session-by-session and week-by-week basis. This allows us to sort of build up into the program by having a little bit of an on-ramping phase. This really helps avoid kids getting huge blisters right when they start, and then you're taking a step back right away, or maybe injuring themselves by having too much volume right out of the gate. So we kind of advise easing into it and ramping up. And then we'll add more volume as we progress through the program. What should the ratio of heavy and light implements look like compared to standard weight implements? According to the studies done by the Soviets and the overload and underload integral training study done by Coop Durin, they seem to find that a 2-to-1 training frequency of the overweight, underweight implements to the standard weight implements is optimal. How much of an overload should you use? How much of an underload should you use? We've done several in-house studies to try to optimize a bat speed training program, and we've found that even with overloads of 25 to 30% and underloads of 25 to 30%, you can still see big time progress, big gains in your bat speed. Considering all the different results of the studies we have examined today, I tend to continue to suggest shooting for a 20% overload and a 20% underload. This creates the training response that we're after. However, the most important element we see in bat speed enhancement is intent. Even if your overload and underload aren't perfect, but you have big time intent in all of your training sessions, you're gonna see gains, you're gonna see improvement. On the other hand, if you have the perfect overload and underload, but little to no intent in your training sessions, you're not gonna see nearly as good of results. The overall key here is making sure that you figure out a way to hold yourself accountable and have intent in all your training sessions. Remember, we're trying to create the muscle fiber types to give us the capacity to swing the bat faster. And able to do that, we need to create enough of a stimulus that it forces the body to create those fiber types. Intent, which creates intensity, is the key to the whole thing. Using a product like the Bat Speed Recon will absolutely create that intensity in your sessions. Because of the objective feedback that it offers, it holds you accountable, it squeezes a little extra effort out of every swing, and over the long stretch of history, that marginal difference, that marginal added effort on each rep adds up to big gains over your competition. For those of you out there using the Bat Speed Recon and putting together your own bat speed training programs, we would love to hear your feedback. We'd love to hear what kind of training programs or protocols you're implementing and how they're working for you, what kind of results you guys are getting. We really want to advance the conversation, and hopefully as a community, we can continue to optimize these bat speed training programs and protocols to help athletes enhance their bat speed effectively, efficiently, and safely. However, we also know that there's a lot of information to parse through here, so we've done the legwork for you and we put together a great 6-week training protocol that you can use that follow all of these scientific principles that we talked about in this video. You can click the link in the description below and get that 6-week training protocol if you're interested. Let us know in the comments below what your training protocol looks like right now, what kind of results you're getting. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for the continued support. Get out there, get that bat speed going, baby.